Hi everyone, I'm Eric Wiesenauer. We're looking at Lamentations 3 through 5 today. Lamentations was probably written by Jeremiah, um, and he's expressing his grief and his sorrow as he's seeing the captivity of the Jews taken into Babylon. A lot of the first two chapters of Lamentations was dealing with the nation, the city, the suffering going on. And now in chapter 3, it's going to start dealing with, I think, Jeremiah's own personal suffering. He uses the words I and me a lot more in chapter 3. He says, I am the man who has been afflicted under the rod of his wrath. His is God's wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away. He has broken my bones. Besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me dwell in darkness like the dead of long ago. He has walled me about so that I cannot escape. He's made my chains heavy. All right, and so these could be metaphorical chains and broken bones, and or they could be physical. It could be real when he was in prison or being taken captive. It's poetry, so it's hard to tell whether it's physical or emotional, or how that a metaphor for that. But either way, it's expressing deep sorrow and grief. And he goes on in verse 17, my soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished. So is my hope for the Lord, from the Lord. And so, deep sorrow being expressed here by Jeremiah. But then in verses 20 and 21, there's a transition. 21 in particular, he says, my soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. So his soul is being crushed here. But this I call to mind. And there's a word here, a very important word, therefore. Therefore is a word that demonstrates a conclusion, right? It points out a conclusion. So everything coming before the word therefore is the reasoning. Therefore, the conclusion. And he's expressing all this sorrow for everything going on there and of the suffering. And then he says, therefore, I have hope. The conclusion he draws is hope from the suffering, the result. He said, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. This is just after he's talking about being afflicted by the Lord, right, and suffering as a result. He says his mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness, he says. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. And so you see this significant transition at the word therefore. He's talking about all his sufferings, and then he's talking about the mercies, the love and forgiveness that result from the suffering. It's literally as though he needed the suffering in order to experience the hope. And if you think about it, when everything is going well, what do you really have to hope for? You kind of need that suffering in order to have hope for God's mercies. And God is faithful. He will, he does express his love for us, and sometimes we have to suffer in order to see it. Then in chapter 4, he gets into the particular people, the sufferings of the people. He says, and this gets pretty graphic. He's talking about infants and children and women and the suffering they're going through. Some of the most vulnerable people in their society. And we just read in the book of Jeremiah about how the poor people were left behind, and a lot of the other people were the soldiers and the men and the wealthy. They were taken captive, and the poor were left behind. And it says things like, the tongue of the nursing infant sticks to the roof of its mouth for thirst. Children beg for food, but no one gives to them. I mean, how how bad does it have to be for a child to beg you for food and you don't even have any to give them? Now their face is blacker than soot. They're not recognized in the streets. Their skin is shriveled to their bones. It's become dry as wood. Happier were the victims of the sword than the victims of hunger who wasted away, pierced by the lack of the fruit of the field. I mean, definite suffering here. They talk about women boiling their children in order to have food. This probably maybe took place during the siege on Jerusalem, when they couldn't get food in and out. I don't know. Don't know for sure, but Jeremiah is witnessing this suffering. He's expressing that. And so you can see how not only does the nation as a whole suffer, but the individual suffer as a result. And then a little bit in chapter 4, and then in chapter 5, it talks about comes back to the nation as a whole, the sins of the nation, and how they really resulted in this suffering. And what's interesting, I thought, in chapter 4, verse 5, he says, "Those who once feasted on delicacies perish in the streets. Those who were brought up in purple embrace ash heaps." And then he says in verse 12, "The kings of the earth did not believe, nor any of the inhabitants of the world, that foe or enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem." They were proud, and they were wealthy, and they were comfortable. Right? That's what's being described here. The feasting on delicacies, wearing of the purple, and the what was the other thing there? They just didn't believe anyone could defeat them. They didn't think anyone could get into the gates of Jerusalem, and so they were proud. Right? And it says that even in those situations, those people were perishing in the streets. They were wearing ash instead of purple, right? They were covered in ash. And they were being carted off to Babylon. Their city, Jerusalem, was being sieged and then captured and then burned to the ground. And so they were proud, and it didn't last forever, right? Jerusalem didn't last forever. I think this is analogous to some of the things that we're dealing with in our own country, right? We've experienced a lot of comfort and wealth and success internationally. It feels like we can't lose, right? We can't be defeated. No one's going to come in and wipe us out. And that's how they felt, right? So, but it's because they turned from the Lord that the Lord allowed used another nation to come in and wipe them out. And so we're not necessarily safe. The Lord can do what he wants to do. And the Lord is definitely stronger than the United States or Jerusalem. But I love this verse in chapter 5, it's verse 19. 19. It says, "But you, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures to all generations." And so, by contrast, it's not a nation that lasts forever. It's not a people that lasts forever. It's the Lord and his throne, his ruling, that lasts forever and endures to all generations, then and now.